Joe Biden is also not a leader. Joe Biden is he's a stooge for the Democratic National Convention, the same Democratic National Convention that tried to undermine Bernie Sanders and support Hillary Clinton until they got caught. Remember that?
Yeah.
Like, that's all politics.
Right.
That's not leadership.
But isn't that the deep state? I'm the king of bringing it back. Isn't the deep state those incredibly powerful actors in those institutions like the CIA, the Democratic National Convention, or the Republican National Convention, coupled with, lobbyists? Like, we're all working for the same interest, which is to enhance American hegemony at their behest and not at what's best for the American people.
Again, it has, if without it being organized.
Without it being organized.
It's not the deep state, because the deep state is defined, it's assumed as being some sort of organized body. What you're saying is just as a bunch of rich people whose best interest is to stay rich.
Right.
That's just human nature.
But it's corruption.
The United States is a corrupt country.
Yeah.
Don't doubt for a second that we're not a corrupt country. We're just not as corrupt as some of the other countries that are out there.
So Kennedy, let's talk some fun now. Man, my mind is blown. You really this is why I got to get more smart people on this podcast. No offense to my guests, because they've all been intelligent in their own ways. You said RFK Jr. thinks his father was whacked by the CIA. I don't even believe that. And I believe a lot of conspiracies. So JFK, your thoughts? I know you've been asked this 1,000 times, but if not the deep state, could it have been a collusion between certain individuals, a conspiracy, right? So to take Kennedy out? Here's what's
undeniable, right? Kennedy was assassinated, undeniable. He was he was an unprecedented and very dynamic leader at the time, right? And there's a lot of reasons why people would feel threatened by JFK.
Right.
So all of that's true. We can't ignore any of that.
Right.
When there's some other interesting data points. When intelligence information is classified, it's classified under a header called 2 times 25 or a 25x2, which means 25 years times 2. So the most classified sensitive information is by default classified for 50 years, because the assumption is that after 50 years, whatever was a secret can now be reviewed and declassified and shared with the American people. Now, the vast majority of information that's classified to 25x2, 25 times 2, the vast majority of the information, when it's reviewed, if it's reviewed, it's released because it's not relevant anymore. But for some reason, when his stuff came up to be reviewed after 50 years, it was reclassified again.
Did Biden or Trump do that?
Trump. It was under Trump, that's right? A certain number of pages were released, but then the rest of the file was not released. So what that means is either it's DMV style bullshit, nobody actually did it, or there are still secrets in that file that would have negative impact on American national security today.
Right.
Before, this is important to me, because before that time period, we didn't know whether or not it was all just smoke and mirrors. Right. Now we have additional new data that suggests there really is something in that file that could harm national security. Now, does that mean that it was an American shooter? No. It could also mean that it was a Soviet shooter. It could also mean that it was a allied shooter. It could also mean that it was some sort of weird compromise. Right. It could just be the fact that they don't ever want anyone to know how to assassinate an American president.
Right.
We don't know, but there's still some sort of relevant secret in the JFK file.
Wow. It's like, do you know that if Americans knew it broadly, it would shake our faith in the system?
Yes. And that is why when you talk to me, you see the level of faith I have in the system, right? Because my foundations were rocked. My foundations were rocked. I have 2 aha moments. My first aha moment was when I went through training at the agency, at CIA, when I went through the farm, because I was one of those kids and young adults and college students where I was and I'm sure you're the same way because you were a successful criminal for a while. Right. That's why I love criminals. Just so you know, I love talking to criminals because criminals are the only people who are willing to risk it all on what they think might be true, even though it's completely contradictory to what everybody has told them.
Right.
Right. And then you guys
what history has shown.
And you make but you make a ton of money, you have a ton of fun, but unfortunately the odds usually turn out against you because you're not sanctioned like we are.
Right.
But my point is, my first aha moment came at the agency when I went through the farm, because I had all these suspicions. I was like, I don't think this is true. And I don't think this is true. And I don't think it works this way, but everybody says it does. And I had to take tests that said that this is the way it works. And I've had to follow these rules to not get in trouble, but I have to doubt that this is really how it works. And then I go to the agency and they teach me exactly how it works. And I realize that the reason we're taught all that wrong bullshit is to make sure that people who are trained know how to break the rules. Like you went to the criminal school of hard knocks.
Yeah.
I went to the criminal school sanctioned and cultivated by the federal government. Wow. We had the same skills. Right. I just was taught them by a guy named Nick, and you had to learn them on your own. Right. Right. Wow. But once we learned similar skills, I could professionalize my skills because they always worked. Right. And I had the best tools, the best tech, the best, people to help me. You didn't have those things. Right. You had to figure what might work, and you had to always worry about technological advances and how that was going to undermine your ability to cover your tracks. Right.
Can you name, without, I don't want to poke you, the NDA that you had to sign, but can you name just a couple of things right off the bat that blew your mind when you went through the farm?
So
just about the capabilities of spying.
Let me give you two things, right?
Intelligence.
I'll give you one tech capability and one human behavior capability, right? So the human behavior capability that blew my mind was something called elicitation. And elicitation is a series of skills that you can use to get someone to divulge sensitive information without you asking for it, right?
Wow.
So there is a predictable human response to asking questions, having a conversation, smiling, changing body position. Like there's a predictable response that transcends education, language, culture, age, religion. It's human nature. Like if I were to stop talking right now, after about 3 seconds, it would be so awkward that you would feel compelled to talk.
Let's do it. I've bombed so many times on stage that I can just sit in silence. So I'm not the one to do this experiment with. But you're right. Yes.
But people will feel the awkwardness. The audience would feel the awkwardness, right?
Yeah.
So that's one form of elicitation. But then there's other forms, like, asking people loaded questions, like if you were king for a day, what would you do about this? Or if you were to have $1,000 today, what would you do about that? Or you could ask them parallel questions where you ask them about when they graduated college, because what you're really trying to find out is how old are you? And when you ask them, what's your favorite football team? Because what you're really trying to get to is where did you grow up? So there's all sorts of elicitation skills. And for me, we were always taught, like, if you need something, ask for it. If you want something, ask for it. And I remember growing up being like, I don't think that's true, because when I go to my mom and dad and I say, can I stay out late on Friday? They know exactly what I want.
Yeah.
Well, I should ask something else, right? I should ask something else so they don't know what I want. So I should say something like, hey, is it okay if I hang out with Brian on Friday night? Because maybe they'll say yes to that. But as soon as I say, can I stay out late? They think he's going to go have sex and get pregnant prematurely, right?
Right.
So for a long time, I thought that there had to be some kind of social dynamic that is different than what we were taught. CIA taught me through elicitation, which was just one example of the social dynamic, that was true. Let me give you a tech example.
Right.
I believed for a long time that you could have a cell phone, and if you turned off your cell phone, you couldn't be tracked. Or if you took out the battery from your cell phone, you couldn't be tracked, right? So if you ever wanted to get off the grid, just turn off your phone or put it in airplane mode or do whatever else, right? What I learned when I was at the agency is there are so many different types of technology on your phone that your phone can't survive. Your phone is built to survive even when the battery doesn't work. Wow. So it's always a receiver. It may not always be a transmitter.
Right.
So technology, there's a technology out there, I'll give you one right now, called ad tech. Have you ever heard of ad tech?
No.
Ad tech means advertising technology. Your phone serves you advertisements.
Yeah.
And those advertisements relate to two things that you've searched in the past and locations where you are.
Oh, right.
How does the ad tech know where you are?
Yeah, how the f does it? But can't you turn it off? You can turn your location off.
You can turn your location off, but turning off your location does not turn off your ad tech.
Right.
Because your ad tech can still know where you are. because for the advertisers who pay money to be presented to your phone, the technology still wants to collect their money. So if you turn off your location, if you were able to turn off your ad tech, then they would no longer be able to advertise to you on behalf of the advertisers. They would lose money. Right. So instead they leave your ad tech on, you turn off your location, and then they still serve the ad to you as an amalgam. Yeah. But they don't serve the ad on your actual device.
And I wonder where they got that technology from.
They would get that technology from, and here's the thing that everybody needs to understand. New technology, like you name the technology. New technology is expensive. Yeah. The first buyer for new technology is the federal government. Right. Because the first thing they want to do is test it for national security capability. Right. So when ad tech came out in the public sector, it was already available to law enforcement, military, and us long before that, right? Just in a more rudimentary form.
Now, what about NSA? What about like some current events? Like, do Americans really have any rights to privacy?
The privacy question is relevant, but it's tied up in legal definitions. So yes, Americans have a right to privacy from their government. But what happens is you waive your right to privacy from commercial entities. Right. So whenever you sign up for Verizon and you pay for a Verizon plan and you share your contacts with Verizon and then all those apps that you download, right, where you click yes, yes, you can use this. Yes, you can share my location. Yes, you can access my contact list. Every time you hit yes, you're giving away your privacy to Verizon or to AT&T or to T-Mobile. So then when the federal government wants information about you, they just buy it from Verizon.
Right. And does that not fly in the face of the TikTok ban, where they're like, the Chinese can, they set up this whole app to spy on Americans? Can't they just, the Chinese, a foreign government, also just buy Americans' information?
The difference between TikTok, the reason TikTok is such an issue in the national security sector isn't because it's collecting your information. It's because of what it's doing to feed you information. The TikTok algorithm is outside of our control. So we don't know why it's choosing to feed us what it chooses to feed us. And I'm sure if you've ever used TikTok, you've seen it where you're like, why am I seeing this? Right? When you're looking at Facebook or Instagram, it's much less often that you look at something and you're like, why am I seeing this?
Well, but clearly the market, more people like what TikTok is doing with the algorithm. That's why it's the most used social media app.
Or what people like is the constant distraction.
So what do you make of this ban?
I think the ban is wise.
Really?
I think the ban is wise, and I'll tell you why. Because we need to be more aware of now. I can understand that when Facebook and Instagram and even LinkedIn, when they all came on board, Twitter, when they all came on board, social media was new to us. Nobody had ever known what it was like to scroll, like, dislike, share. All that was new. Well, now we've had a decade to learn what scrolling behavior does to us. We've watched the demise of our social engagement, the increase in anxiety, the decrease in paying attention, the work impact of constant like scrolling and getting sucked into technology. It's very similar to 1950s cigarettes versus 1990s cigarettes. We learned that they're bad for you. Right. And then the thing that killed cigarettes was the taxes.
Yeah, legislation.
So now what we've learned is how negative social media can be. TikTok has the dual negative impact of one being the next evolution of stupid scrolling. You don't even actually have to scroll, right? It changes. Right. It just feeds you constant distraction without any real meat. But then on top of that, it's also owned by a foreign corporation. So we don't control the actual algorithm that feeds you. So when it knows that you're a 34-year-old male who's a professional, it can feed you a line of content that China wants to feed a 34-year-old professional. But more dangerous than that is when it feeds an 11-year-old. It could be feeding an 11-year-old a thread of narrative that it wants an 11-year-old to learn, so that when that 11-year-old is 31, they already have their mind is already shaped on certain opinions.
So like cigarettes, like a minimum ages for drinking, for driving, drinking and driving. It's the public good is trumps free speech.
That's
Or
not free
freedom.
speech.
Freedom.
Freedom.
Freedom of information. So you think that's more important? A lot of people would agree with you. I'm not criticizing.
I'm saying that we have to invent a new kind of decision. We have to invent a new kind of policy here for ourselves. Because here's the thing. Anybody out there who has an 11-year-old child does not want them to have freedom of information.
Right. There's no freedom when you're a kid. You're not entitled to freedom.
Most 18-year-olds, I think you would probably agree, you were probably still dumb.
Oh.
So do we want 18-year-olds to have freedom of information? Right.
But they're free to do everything else.
Except
I guess
drink.
Yeah.
See what I mean?
States.
So there's all these arbitrary, they're free to die for the country, but they're not free to drink. Right. There's all sorts of these arbitrary rules. So what I'm saying is we just need to figure out how we're going to do it.
Okay.
Right. Do you remember when you could only get music through CDs?
I do.
And
I'm old enough.
And you could sign up for those, you could sign up to have new CDs of outcoming music mailed to you.
Yes.
I forget what those were called.
Yes.
Clearinghouses, whatever.
Yeah,
those were.
right.
Well, if you wanted to buy that for your child, you always had to check a box whether explicit was allowed or whether explicit was not allowed or whether explicit was allowed with a label on it and then it would be bleeped out. Right? Something similar to that might be what is the future of social media.
Right.
Where if a user is registered with a birthday before whatever, then explicit is either not presented or like certain categories of information, like foreign information cannot be presented.
Right.
News sources cannot be presented. Who knows what, right? YouTube does something similar with YouTube Children, right? So it could go in that direction, or it could just be something where it's like, if you're not 21 years old, you can't use this app. Or what TikTok, if it was a truly legitimate business, it would create a TikTok America, and it would let Americans, or it would fit itself into American requirements, and it would stop using Chinese servers and Chinese content.
I think that's what people argue, is that this is just a play to, some people say, well, it's because TikTok and their algorithm is exposing what's happening in Gaza and Palestine and Israel. And then other people say this is just a play by big tech in America to cut out the competition.
It's both.
Right.
Both is what makes sense. It's a good technology.
Right. So how can you support that?
Because it benefits the United States.
Right.
It benefits Americans.
That's right. Okay.
The U.S. economy.
Got to start to think like you, man.
The U.S. economy, the GDP.
Right.
You know what? If I'm the CEO of TikTok America.
Yeah.
And I can basically flip a switch and turn off the algorithm from China, and I can turn on the algorithm for America. Do you know what my algorithm is going to feed a bunch of 11 and 12-year-old kids?
Yeah.
Pro-America stuff.
Right.
I'm going to make sure they see lots of flags and lots of freedom and lots of police doing a good job and lots of nurses doing a good job and lots of trust your teacher and lots of stay off of drugs. That's what I'm going to make sure gets fed on TikTok. Right. But if I'm not in charge of it, then now it's an executive in Shanghai who's deciding what 11 and 12-year-old Americans see.
Right.
And I'm not saying I'm going to use it as a covert influence tool, but I am going to say I'm going to control the algorithm so that it benefits my country and it benefits the business.
Yeah. Does the CIA have real hooks in American social media companies, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram?
I will answer this carefully.
Oh.
Because it's one of those types of countries, one of those types of questions, right? The U.S. intelligence community works very closely with American companies to support American interests. And American companies work very closely with CIA and other intelligence community companies or intelligence community agencies because they know that if they get manipulated by a foreign power, then policy will change and their company will be killed. So when you think of Facebook, Facebook is it's a company. It's not a federal agency. That means a simple act of legislation can totally destroy the company.
Right.
So when Zuckerberg cooperates with the federal government, when Zuckerberg agrees to block certain content, it's not because he's blocking freedom of speech. It's because he's being very conservative and protecting his business.
Right. He doesn't want Hunter Biden laptop story coming up because they asked him, he's trying to protect himself. Oh, I understand that. 1,000%.
Right. So now you see both sides of the now you see both sides of the coin.
Right.
Now you see federal government would want to work with Zuckerberg because he has reach. Zuckerberg would want to work with the federal government because they have power.
They have power. So if you,
So like,
is that freedom to operate though? If you have in a supposedly free country with a relatively free market?
we're not a free country. We are a free market.
Oh,
Think about it, dude. Are you allowed to have a business if you're not registered?
no.
Is that freedom? Are you allowed to steal a car in Georgia and take it to Kentucky and then be free?
I think laws make freedom. I think we're freer. I think it's truly, we've been to Mexico. We've seen what happens when there are no laws. What to me, there's a net less freedom.
So what you're describing there is the antithesis of what freedom is. Freedom is the freedom to choose for yourself.
Just absolutely.
That is freedom.
So no country has that.
So no country has it. That's why when people talk about the United States, they talk about the freest country.
Right.
Okay,
so we have
because we still have a lawful structure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that lawful structure is even worse, right? We have laws. Are those laws immutable? No, they can be changed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what a judge's job is? A judge's job is not to enforce the law. A judge's job is to infer the law, interpret the law. So you could literally sit with the same charge in front of two different judges and have two different outcomes.
What's mostly the Supreme Court, right?
That's all judges. That's all judges. Every judge everywhere is supposed to interpret the law for their court. That's why there's an appeal process. Right. So that if you disagree with this judge, you can appeal to that judge.
Okay. So back to my question about Facebook, though, and the intervention, if it's a free market, let's say that, or one, obviously it's a mixed economy, right? But pretty free market, pretty driven, at least ideologically by capitalism and competition. If a government can legislate your company away, seems like a bad thing. It seems like a thing that the whatever, elements of the intelligence agencies and the political parties should not be doing. Or am I wrong? If a Facebook has such a reach that it could be manipulated by Russia, then it should be intervened. Is that how you guys think about it?
Well, it's not that they don't legislate away a company. They legislate away a sellable market. What happened with burning coal? What happened with big tobacco? What happened with alcohol above a certain proof? What happened with, think about it. What happened with unlimited speed limits?
Right.
They don't kill the company.
They tax it or
they change the rules around it. So now all of a sudden, if they were to have something if they were to create a cyber tax where for every megabyte of information that you use on the electrical grid, you pay a certain taxes. Well, now that would absolutely destroy social media. Right. Overnight. Right. Without attacking social media.
Okay. Well, you definitely answered the question without answering it. Brilliant. No, but we got that though. Okay. So by the way, what would happen if you as ex-CIA and your wife too, which I think people who are a fan of your wife is ex-CIA. What would happen if you violated the fourth basket of secrets?
We would be held criminally liable.
Like treason?
It wouldn't be treason. It would be treason if we violated that secret. If we violated the fourth bucket of secrets by willfully giving those secrets to a foreign adversary, knowing that adversary would get an advantage over the American people. That would be treason.
I see.
Because treason requires intent.
Right.
And intent has to be proven.
Right.
There have been plenty of CIA officers who have violated the fourth basket. Right. John Kiriakou is one of the most notorious. Right. He told secrets he was told not to tell that damaged national security. But what he was held in was he was held in violation of his contract, but he was also held in the mismanagement of classified information.
Right.
So he didn't go to prison for treason. He went to prison for irresponsibility, basically.
Okay.
Right. That's the most likely thing. It's still a criminal offense, but that's what would happen.
Okay. So this leads into me asking your opinion first on Edward Snowden. One side sees him as a, freedom fighter, a brave individual, certainly a brave individual, whether you agree with what he did or not. Somebody who exposing information to the American people about the NSA and basically warrantless spying. He's now in Russia in exile. What do you think about that?
Edward Snowden's a coward and a villain, and there's no way around it. Like, I understand people have a different opinion. Their opinion is 100% ill-informed and wrong. Okay. Right? If you think Snowden is innocent, you're an idiot. Snowden is not innocent. He took secrets he knew he was not supposed to share. And then he took extra secrets that had nothing to do with spying on Americans. He took additional secrets from his knowledge of what was happening at NSA, and he used them both as bargaining chips so that when he exposed, when he whistleblew on NSA, and then America didn't like it, he knew he had extra money in his pocket, and that's how he was able to negotiate his way across all the adversaries of the United States. Where did he go first? He left here, and I think he went to Cuba, or possibly he went to Uruguay. But he basically jumped from anti-American government to anti-American government until he ended up getting residency in Russia. What kind of hero whistleblower has to befriend every adversary of the United States?
Well, that's because he knows what's going to happen to him for exposing. This would be the counter argument, because he knows the consequences of exposing the American government. And he has no choice but to live in Russia because it's the only place he's safe.
That is a narrative that was written by our adversaries. That dude could have just as easily gone to Sweden or Switzerland or Norway or any country that's neutral and it had been like, hey, I'm looking for political refuge because my government is going after me for whistleblowing. And those countries would have been, those countries would not have turned him over to the United States. Those countries would have,
Norway wouldn't have.
No, those countries would have been like, America, tell us what you're going to do with this individual who seems to be adhering to the laws of your own land. But he didn't. Right out of the gates, he didn't adhere to the laws of the land because he was exposing secrets that did not have to do with what he was whistleblowing on. That's what he was using as trade currency, right? Okay. And the damage that Snowden did to national security operations for the United States for decades.
To who? To who?
To the American people.
Right. But how was that damaging to the American people? So, to show them that they're being spied on illegally? That's
not what was damaging to the American people. So first of all, the American people were not being spied on. The American people were granting approval. They were granting acknowledgement to a company to collect their data. And then the company was selling the data to the federal government. There was no federal government mass collection of data. There was an agreement that followed American laws that was approved by court systems that were granted classification levels to be able to understand the program. So the whole thing was legal through the eyes of the court that was being leveraged at the time. Does that mean that a different court interpreting the law a different way at a different time judged differently? Absolutely. That's exactly what happened. The court of 2001 decided it was okay. The court of 2009 decided it was not okay, right? That's the problem with our court system. That's the problem with our judicial system. The point is, there was no mass collection of American data. It was all legal according to the laws at the time. Okay. What was for sure illegal was that he was whistleblowing about that program. But what he was trading, the information that he actually downloaded and stole from NSA, were multiple programs in addition to that program.
What were those other programs?
I can't tell you what those other programs were, but those other programs were programs that had nothing to do with collecting on Americans, and they had everything to do with operations that would keep Americans safe. Okay. And as a result of his using both chips to protect himself, it put all of us at risk for a long time.
Do you think that there are situations where when it's appropriate for CIA whistleblowers to whistleblow?
There's always, whistleblowing is protected because there's times when it's appropriate. But it should always be an option of last resort. Like, Edward Snowden didn't even go to the Office of Internal Affairs. Like, that's who you're supposed to go to first. Whatever your biggest concern is with what's going on inside, you take it to the Internal Affairs Office first. And if the Internal Affairs Office doesn't take you seriously, you either take it to them again or you take it to another Office of Internal Affairs, right? Here's what's crazy. Snowden wasn't a staff officer. he was a contractor, which means he worked for an American company that was on contract to work for NSA. So he could have raised it in his own company. Then he could have raised it inside of the NSA. Then he could have raised it with like a third-party government agency whose job is to keep contractors and agencies accountable. He had 3 different internal investigative options that he could have raised that to, protected by the whistleblower laws and everything, right? And then even after all 3, if all 3 of those still would have rejected him, he still could have gone to media if it was American media. Instead, this guy skipped all 3 of those, went to foreign media, and then took like bonus secrets like that. That shows that either he was wildly ignorant, like wildly ignorant of what he was about to do, or he was very malicious in his intent. And he knew that he needed to have an insurance policy because he would need to run and he would need to have a plan.
Could it be possible that he was an asset of Russia?
Unlikely. It's unlikely that he would have been an asset because Russia would have had more to gain if Snowden would have just stayed invisible, because they'd be able to keep pulling secrets from him forever.
Right.
As soon as he goes public, he's useless.
Right.
Now he's essentially like a what's it called? A scapegoat, and he's a model. He's a representation now of all the things wrong with democracy.